Sarah stood frozen as the sound of a bulldozer neared, ready to tear down her home. Fear gripped her, but in her eyes was something no one had seen before. "You can't stop this," the HOA rep sneered. What happened next shocked everyone, even those who thought they controlled it all. But let's start at the beginning. Sarah Matthews had poured years of effort into creating the perfect backyard, her sanctuary. Every stone in the fire pit, every flower in bloom, every tree towering above her was placed with intention. She'd worked tirelessly, especially during late nights, to make it all her own. The fire pit wasn't just a backyard feature, it was a symbol of her independence, her quiet rebellion against the world's chaos, a place where she could recharge with friends and family. But then came the letter. It hit her like a cold slap across the face. The HOA, in their cold, bureaucratic tone, stated that her fire pit violated some obscure regulation. The same regulation they had somehow missed during her initial home inspection. Now, without warning, they scheduled a bulldozer to tear it all down. It was impossible to process. In an instant, the sanctuary she'd built was under threat. She wasn't given a chance to fight it, just a cold ultimatum: remove it herself, or they'd handle it. When Sarah called the HOA, the voice on the other end was flat, uninterested. "Rules are rules," they said, as if she had no say in the matter. This wasn't just about a fire pit anymore. It was about something much deeper. Control. The HOA's unchecked power was suffocating, reducing her personal space to nothing more than a set of rules to follow. Sarah felt small, almost helpless against the weight of bureaucracy. The more she thought about it, the angrier she became. What had started as a personal sanctuary was now a battleground for her dignity. And yet, deep down, Sarah knew she couldn't just let this go. Sarah's first reaction was disbelief. She couldn't process what she was reading at first. It seemed so absurd, so unjust. How could they do this to her? This was her backyard, the space she had carefully crafted over years of hard work. And yet, here it was. A cold, impersonal letter telling her that the sanctuary she had built was going to be ripped apart. But disbelief quickly turned into a simmering anger. The arrogance of the HOA, the complete disregard for what this meant to her, was infuriating. How dare they? She wasn't going to let them destroy everything she had worked for, not without a fight. Sarah wasn't the type to back down easily, and the more she thought about it, the more determined she became. She spent days poring over the HOA's rules and local regulations, trying to find a crack, a loophole, anything that could help her make sense of this nightmare. It was in the fine print that she found her answer. Buried deep in the legal language was a clause that offered protection to homeowners like her. Protection against arbitrary decisions and abuse of power by the HOA. If they acted in bad faith, they were in violation of the law. That was all she needed. The power she felt in that moment was electric. She wasn't helpless. She had a right to fight back, and now she had the leverage to do it. With the clause in hand, Sarah called her lawyer. She laid out the situation, and the more they talked, the more her resolve solidified. This wasn't just about a fire pit anymore. It was about her rights, her dignity, and standing up to an oppressive system. If it came to it, she was ready to take the HOA to court. But she wasn't alone. Her neighbors, who had quietly watched as the HOA's power grew unchecked, saw what was happening. One by one, they reached out to her, some offering to join her in protest, others pledging to help with legal fees. It wasn't just her fight anymore. It was a community rallying together against the injustice of an all-powerful, unchecked system. Sarah's anger had transformed into something else entirely, an unyielding sense of purpose. This wasn't just about a backyard anymore. It was about reclaiming control over her life. And with the support of her neighbors, she was ready to take the fight to the HOA. The day the bulldozer arrived, Sarah stood frozen in front of her backyard. a cocktail of dread and resolve brewing inside her. The sound of the engine, loud and rumbling, grew steadily closer as the massive machine trundled down the street. Sarah felt the vibrations in her bones. She wasn't going to let them destroy everything she'd worked for, not without a fight. Not today. As the bulldozer rounded the corner and onto her property, Sarah's heart pounded in her chest. A crowd had gathered at her fence, her neighbors standing in silent solidarity, some with shocked expressions, others offering subtle nods of support. Sarah could feel their eyes on her, the weight of their expectations pressing down on her. This wasn't just her fight anymore. It was about something bigger. It was about standing up against a system that had too long been unchecked. The bulldozer inched forward, its enormous tires grinding against the gravel of her driveway, and Sarah's pulse quickened. She took a steadying breath, her voice barely a whisper as she stepped forward. She raised her hand, signaling the driver to stop. The giant machine ground to a halt, and the harsh noise of its engine faded into the heavy silence. From the truck that had been trailing the bulldozer, Karen, the HOA representative, stepped out. She had that same smug, almost rehearsed smile on her face that Sarah had come to loathe. "You were warned, Sarah. You had your chance to remove it," Karen said, her voice dripping with condescension. But Sarah wasn't intimidated. She reached into her pocket, pulling out the legal document she'd so carefully studied. Her hands were steady as she held it out, her voice calm but filled with unwavering determination. "This fire pit stays, or you'll have to answer to the law. You can't destroy something that's not in violation of the actual rules." For the first time, Sarah saw a flicker of uncertainty pass over Karen's face. The smug smile faltered, just for a moment, but it was enough. Sarah's heart surged. The power was shifting. The HOA hadn't anticipated someone like her standing up, not with the law on her side. The crowd behind her murmured, and the energy in the air shifted. The battle wasn't over yet, but Sarah had just planted her flag. The first blow had been struck. The following weeks were a whirlwind. The HOA attempted to force their decision, but Sarah's legal team was relentless. They filed a lawsuit, citing the violation of the legal clause. The case drew local media attention, and soon enough, the HOA was under scrutiny for their heavy-handed tactics. In the courtroom, Sarah stood her ground, presenting a compelling case that the HOA had overstepped their bounds. With mounting pressure, the HOA had no choice but to settle, and not only did Sarah win, but she also earned the right to keep her fire pit and a public apology from the HOA. The community rallied around her as a local hero. The bulldozer had never even touched the ground. As Sarah stood in her backyard that evening, the fire pit roaring to life, she finally felt the peace she had worked so hard for. The battle had been long and hard, but it was worth it. The victory wasn't just personal. It was a victory for everyone who had ever felt powerless against bureaucracy.